Sequels and spin-offs and all of that stuff aren't new things, obviously. They've been around far before I was born, partly because they can be great. The first Star Wars film was good, but then Empire Strikes Back comes out and takes everything to the next level. Suddenly you're getting a trilogy with a story greater than a single film's arc. There are problems though. Of course there is a tendency for companies to see sequels as, can we piggyback off the success of this previous film to make something cheaper and just keep on bleeding it until we run out of profits? We know that can happen, and I'm also not just going to say the obvious problems, we lose originality or the wonder that can come from as many standalone films when increasingly the box office is dominated by stuff that exists on the back of already established franchises. Because I think that is a problem, not awful, because there are always going to be standalone films or ones that don't spawn mass franchises. There have been great standalone films released in the last few years. People always get extreme about franchises taking over, but even so, there are other problems they cause, the sort of problems only a therapist would devote a video to talk about, because it's only really a therapist who cares about this sort of thing, I think. But I do think this is important. Once upon a time, I made a video called Feeling Empty When You Finish a Good Show and Why It's a Good Thing. And in that I talked about how finishing a show or book or film or whatever it is you've been emotionally invested in is really hard. It can feel painful, sometimes like a genuine loss, a genuine thing to mourn. Especially if it's a story you were deeply invested in at a difficult time in your life. You come away just wishing you could live in that world a little bit longer, but the book has ended or the show has finished. You're left either keen to reread/watch it, or watching interviews with the cast or videos of people reviewing or whatever to just kind of keep that feeling alive until you're ready to let it go. Sometimes it's not as dramatic as that. Sometimes it's just, that was a shame, I enjoyed that. But sometimes it is a big ordeal, and that's a good thing. It's good that it hurts and is difficult to process. Well, not good, but it's an experience to help us come to terms with loss as a whole in a less overwhelming way. Loss is hard. In its most extreme, that's the death of somebody you love, and we're always going to have to experience the death of somebody we love, and nothing can prepare you for that. No, that's a scale beyond all other things. However, the loss of a show you loved is a very similar type of experience, just on a much, much smaller scale. And we have lots of those smaller losses constantly in our lives, finishing school, moving house, friends moving away, losing contact with someone and moving to a new job. There are often gains in most of our changes in life, but there are also losses there too. And if they're healthy experiences of loss, you're given some sense of closure and a goodbye, and even though it hurts, you can allow yourself to miss what you've lost without feeling it's left your heart. And not every experience will be a positive, healthy one. No, sometimes parents tell their children that their pet has gone to live on a farm, or they replace it with a pet that looks very similar and hope you don't notice. And if you do notice, you probably agree to the lie as a child because it's less painful that way, but you still sort of know. Kids aren't as stupid as parents sometimes wish to believe, and that's coming from a children's counsellor. Those kind of experiences deny you the chance to feel the loss, to work through the feelings of grief that you have inside. So hopefully you can see where I'm going with this now. Good stories need to end with good concluded endings. You get closure, and it's sad it's over, but it ended well, it ended properly, and that helps you to let go. I remember when I was still a kid, finishing whenever the last Harry Potter book came out, I would have died to live in that world a little longer, not literally. But I came to terms with the ending, and then Fantastic Beasts happened years later, and it somewhat does undermine the closure you previously had. But that isn't even really my point, watching the world of something you love return in a worse form. No, my point is that there is increasingly an endless treadmill of stuff from the franchise you love. It kind of overwhelms me when I see just how many Star Wars shows are in the works at the moment. It's a ludicrous amount. And I have no expectations for any of them to be much good, but even if they are, even if they're all great, when do we get our ending? Never. It just goes on forever without an ending. Same with the MCU, it ended with Endgame, then it carried on. And emotionally that is kind of a problem, because it creates a culture that teaches you loss is too terrifying, too unbearable to possibly experience. Every good character, good story gets brought back again, like reanimating a corpse for a short while, desperately trying to breathe life into something you were meant to mourn, something that was meant to live on inside of you, not externally. Because I think it's paradoxically in getting to let go that the thing gets to live on inside of you. And I look at this Jurassic World's Dominion bringing back old characters from earlier films, but them not quite being themselves this time. Not being characters with clear arcs or even strong character anymore, just being the same name and face, and that's kind of a haunting idea. Because that really is bringing back something from the dead, only it's not truly alive, it's a sort of shallow Frankenstein's monster. Characters that had solid closure and a clear arc completion before, don't bring them back just to give them no new arc or concluded ending. You know, when a character you like has their story completed and you say goodbye to them, often it comes also with a kind of hope, because you just vaguely know they're going to live on into the sunset or whatever, and it feels good. You don't have to know what comes next, but bringing them back randomly then to pop up in other things kind of diminishes that hoped, imagined closure of an ending you had. You know, I think of the times nowadays when I'll suddenly remember an old friends that I used to know, and I'll think to myself, I wonder how they're doing nowadays, and I guess I could look them up if I bothered to use Facebook or something. Really, I should message a lot of them, and I regret that I don't, but I wonder about them and I feel a little sting of nostalgia, and then I move on with my life again. There is some sense of small loss there, and I do miss those old friends, and it does hurt a little, but I've also come to terms with it in a healthy way, I think. There's even some good friends I had from childhood that I know are different now, and we're meant to go different paths. That's fine. When the original Star Wars trilogy ended, you might have been left occasionally thinking to yourself, I doubt anyone does think like this, but you might have done, I wonder how Luke Skywalker would be doing if the story continued, and you might have ideas about how he would be doing, but you don't know. You don't need to know. You've had your good chance to say goodbye and see him finish well. Well, now we do know what happens, and we also know what happens to everyone else, with everybody always brought back, and in a greater sense, the world itself of a certain franchise always being brought back, always getting to see what it's doing, how it's going, because it's permanently kept alive before us. So what closure do we get then? To just care about a franchise until it degrades in quality bad enough that we can't bear to care any longer? That's not a great lesson in loss, or until we grow out of it, or until there's just so much of it we become overwhelmed and switch off. I don't know. That's enough of me labouring that point though. There's also a second one, which is familiarity. The reason franchises carry on is because the nostalgia, the further drawn out existence of the thing we love, the familiarity for something we know sells more tickets than the unfamiliarity for a completely new story. So we get things we know, and even if it's a new story, it's a new story in a pre-existing universe that will almost certainly have locations and characters we know from other stories popping up at points. Even if they're just there to say, hello, I'm here to remind you this is all familiar, or something. Sometimes, like, referencing something that happened in a previous story of this franchise and doing it again in a more shallow way because, you know, it's that thing from that story you loved. So my question is, does that lead to a culture? And this is very dramatic, all of this when I say this stuff. It doesn't lead to a culture, like it's suddenly these films impact everything and children are irreversibly changed. It's not like that. It's just a more concise way for me to word this. But does it lead to a culture where the unfamiliar becomes daunting rather than exciting? Surely that's what makes the continuation of a story so fun and fulfilling, is that we get to explore something new, something further beyond what we already understand. That's one of the beauties with standalone stories, really. Everything is entirely fresh and new to us. Hopefully, unless it's an unoriginal story. You're given something unfamiliar though, and you go, wow, I didn't know what I'd think, but that turned out to be great. And it makes the idea of the unfamiliar feel interesting, exciting, something to be curious about, not something we need to ward off with the familiar stuff. Here's more familiar stories, here's lots of stuff you know, focus on all this instead. It's kind of mad to think there was once a time where people just went into music shops or blockbusters and just bought or rented albums and films they'd never heard of. They'd just look at the cover and go, huh, this looks interesting, and then they experience that thing. The kind of excitement of that, the surprise. Nowadays I think we're given so much familiarity that's so much more obviously appealing that we start to lose the less obvious, more fulfilling experience of the something new. It happens less, we get drowned out in the familiar. I think one of the best things you can teach a child to be is curious, to delight in curiosity, exploring and discovering something they don't know rather than being afraid of it. I mean both that in the sense of literal things but also just learning, you know. That all leads to creativity and understanding and all sorts. Films teach us that less than they used to, I think. That doesn't mean people stop learning to be curious or stop having healthy experiences of endings. No, other things in life can teach us all this stuff, but it's one thing less to teach us that, I think, when films are increasingly just franchises. It's instead one more thing to say, loss is unbearable, don't ever let it happen. Stay away from things you don't know, and that is kind of a shame. That's all it is, it's not a massive tragedy, but it is still kind of a shame, and I just wanted to share my feelings about that with you. Sometimes it's good to experience things that do end. Sometimes we need that, sometimes we need the unfamiliar. And I guess I just wanted to highlight the fulfilling positivity of that. Let me know if you think I'm wrong, or if I missed the point, or whatever. Comments, all manner of things, all things. Express like. Begin a subscription package with my channel. Pledge support on Patreon. Yeah, hopefully see you next time. And as always, a special thank you goes to Janice McMahon, Luke Hoare, KrzychuKB, Michael Gallagher, InSquares, Dustin Paulson, Tamara Salsi, Sharacroft2814, Joshua C. Follier and Chad Bramwell. Thank you.